Let's take a look at the connections to the dash and the interconnection between the various dash modules. All the dash modules are variants of the version 7 series. Let's take a look at the modules in turn. Dash module number 1 is version 7.2, which won't focus. There we go, version 7.2. Dash module number 2 is version 7.2. Dash module number 3 is version 7.1. Dash module number 4 is version 7.2, and dash module number 5 is version 7.3 actually. All of the modules apart from the dash module number 3, which is the voice display, have a GCM or generic control module. This is common between all the modules and supports the microcontroller, which is a PIC 16F877A, and also the reprogramming port, the ICSP in-circuit serial programming port. Let's take a look at the connections to the various modules in turn. So overall, we'll see on this side here we have a 15-way connector, which is the connection to the serial bus. This is going to link to a module which we still have in design called dash module 0, and this is going to allow communication, RS-232 serial communication, to all of the modules. You'll see that there's a single twisted pair of yellow and black wire in here. This is the transmission from the host computer, which goes to all of the dash modules. And there's also 5 twisted pairs of orange and black, one coming from each of the individual dash modules. Now the function of dash module 0, when it's incorporated, will be to transmit serial data to the various modules, and also to select one of the 5 modules for response. We'll look at the connections to that in a moment. Other connections which we see on here are this 9-way connector, which is a connection from dash module number 3 to the dash top indicators, the countdown lamps. We'll see a single pair of black wires here, which comes from one of the switch pods to operate the horn, and all of the other wires from the 2 switch pods go to the individual modules on the switch and push button connections. We'll look at those in a moment as well. There are 2 connections on each of the switch pods which aren't currently connected, which is the top switch on each of those modules, and we've just brought those out to a pair of green wires on each side so that they can be added to another function later on. Looking at the individual modules then, apart from dash module number 3, the layout is very similar. The counting of the pin numbers on these terminal blocks counts from left to right. So this is pin number 1 on the left hand side and pin number 37 on the right hand side. Only a few of these connections are used because most of the functions are also supported, or the primary functions are also supported by these D-type connectors. Let's look at dash module number 1. The push buttons, and there are 2 per module, are connected on here. There's a latching switch which can be connected to a latching switch or single push button called SW or SW1 on each module, and that's the white wire on each module. So on DM1 that goes in on pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Push button 1 goes on pin 9, that's the yellow wire, and push button 2, the blue wire, goes on pin 10. We also have on each of these modules the ability or the feature to connect a potentiometer or 2 potentiometers, P1 and P2, with a corresponding ground connection for controlling the brightness of the display. That's not currently connected on this dash. We have a link between pins 26 and 27 to enable the onboard speaker to be used for audio tones. If you prefer to use an external speaker, then remove this link, connect the drive to the speaker on pin 26 and the ground return on pin 28 there. The serial communications that we spoke about are twisted pairs. Here is the transmission to the unit, which of course is the receive or RX pin on the module itself, going in on pins 28 and 29, and the transmit out, which is the receive of the host computer, on pin 31 and 32. These connections here are for additional potentiometers or analog inputs if you wish to connect them, and a 0-volt return. Moving on to dash module number 2, the same layout on the power connections. That left hand side is the power connections. This next block of connectors is always the high switched discrete inputs, and the next block is any low switched discrete inputs, which includes the push buttons and switch. So same arrangement on dash module number 2. Power connections, 12 volts and ground, and we use the 12 volts and ground from DM2 to drive the power supply to the left hand switch pod. Okay, so we have power connections here. That's a 5-volt connection in case you want a 5-volt supply to anything. Then we have the high switched discrete inputs, of course, which are also connected on the 25-way serial connector. We have the low switched discrete inputs, which again is the switch on the white wire, the push button number 1 on the yellow wire, and push button number 2 on the blue wire. We then have potentiometers again, not connected. We have the speaker, which is linked to use the onboard speaker again. And we have the receive, serial communication receive, the yellow and black twisted pair, and the transmit, the orange and black twisted pair. We have analog inputs again and a 0-volt return. They're not connected because we're using the D-type connector to put those signals in. We'll come back to DM3 in a moment because it's a bit different. So DM4 again, power and ground, and we're using the power and ground offtake to drive the right hand switch pod. We have the high switched discrete inputs and the low switched discrete inputs, including the switch on white wire, push button 1 on the yellow wire, push button 2 on the blue wire. We have the option for potentiometers, we have the speaker connections, we have the serial bus connections, and we have analog inputs again, which are actually used on the D-type connector, so we don't need to connect them there. Finally, dash module number 5, power connections, which we're not taking off from this one. High switch discrete inputs, low switch discrete inputs, including the switch, the push buttons, potentiometers, if you want to control the brightness, and we can control brightness and all things like that through the serial bus as well, so we don't have to connect anything there. We have the speaker, which is linked to use the onboard speaker, again, is there. And we have the serial bus connections, and we have potential for the any additional analog inputs and the ground return. Let's take a look at dash module number 3 now, because that is a little bit different. We have a link again, in the same way that we have on the other ones, for the speaker, in those 2 pins there, and a ground return. And that ground return I'm actually connecting to the common connection between the transmit and receive serial inputs. You can see that the transmit and receive serial inputs are on here, right at the end on this dash module number 3. There's the receive one, look, there's the transmit one, and here are the switch push button connections. We have potentiometers 1 and 2. We have the normal, auto and pursuit connections, which again go through the D-type connector, so we don't need to connect them there. We have ignition 1 and ignition 2 inputs, and we have 12-volt power inputs or actually you can use those for outputs if you're putting power in through the D-type connector, then you can use those for outputs, as we do on DM2 and DM4. Other connections on here, we have the two yellow wires that go to the switch pods, one goes to each switch pod, brought out here through a fuse, and this is going to go to the stock lighting switch behind the dash. We link the feed to the dimmer switch across, and we go through a fuse, and the reason for that is just to give illumination to the two switch pods. If we look a little closer at DM2, you'll see there's another link in here, which I forgot to mention, right there between the connections marked M and L. L is the line input and M is the output from the microphone amplifier. So if you want to use the onboard microphone to drive the voice display, link M and L in addition to linking the speaker wire on DM3. If you want to use an input through the line input, which is there from the stereo, for example, then you'll need to remove that link as well. Or alternatively, we could remove that link via put it through a switch, so that we can drive the display either from the audio input or from the onboard microphone. Remember, we spoke about these in-circuit serial programming ports on each of the modules 1, 2, 4 and 5. Well, there is one on DM3 as well, but it's a little more difficult to get access to when the dash is installed, so I've left a serial programming lead on here, so that instead of having to work your way and get a connector on there while the dash is installed, you can just hook into this here, and that's just for updating or customizing the software on each of the modules.